The word dun is from a Gaelic word which can mean fort, or fortified place, or stronghold. With time, dun also came to mean hill, or mount. From what I was told on my first visit to the island of Iona, Dun-E simply means hill number one. So there's the first bit of the sermon. Dun-E simply means number one hill. Dun-E is the highest point on the island of Iona in the West Hebrides of Scotland. Iona, as I've told you before, was the place where St. Columba landed when he was exiled from Ireland. He vowed never to set his eyes upon Ireland again, and when he landed on Iona, it was the first place he could no longer see the Emerald Isle. On Iona in 563 A.D., Columba arrived to found a monastery, as he had founded some 35 monasteries throughout Ireland. Along with the 12 monks that accompanied him, Columba settled a monastic community on the island. In those days, the community was surrounded by an earthworks barrier which kept animals and children within the enclosure and hopefully slowed down anyone trying to break into the enclosure. Centuries later, the Benedictine monastery was built, with the accompanying nunnery down the hill from the monastery. Following the Second World War, under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. George MacLeod, later invested with the title Lord of Funerary, the ancient stones of Iona Abbey were rebuilt by the hands of unemployed laborers from Glasgow and theological students from the university. Thus was formed the Iona community, which continues to this day with its members and associates dispersed throughout the world. I tell you all of that to set the stage. Here in this ancient, historic, and mythical island off the coast of Mull, accessible only by boat, here is this year-round population of less than 100 clinging to this rock in the water. The bank comes to Iona on Thursdays in a van that rides a ferry across from the island. It's available for island residents and guests from about 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. There's one phone booth on the island and one convenience store. Thanks to a group of German theologians I met on my first visit, I discovered that there is a pub on the island, and that's about it. There are some very small lobsters in the bay, and there are lobstermen who scratch out a pretty meager living catching them. There's a fellow who runs a boat out to the Isle of Staffa, where you can watch the puffins in the summer months and visit Fingal's Cave, made famous by Mendelssohn in his Overture to the Hebrides. But really, that's about it, save the Abbey and its environs. Well, on my last trip there with our high school students, I climbed the 300-yard tall Dun-E with Andrew Korb and Colin Nesbitt. If I can climb it, anyone can climb it. We climbed it in the early evening, which means there was plenty of daylight left, considering how far north we really are. And when we got up there, my oh my, what we saw. If you look to the west, you look across the sea, and the sunlight seems to bring the water to life. You swear that if you could just get a couple of feet higher, you could best old Columba and see Ireland floating like a gem on the water. If you look to the southwest, you can see the Macker lands, the small farms, and the links golf course that exists on Iona. They're Scots after all. A little further south is the Spouting Cave, where the tide comes in. The water leaps into the air. Looking directly south is St. Columba's Bay, where Columba landed, the port of the Coracle, the old marble quarry with the beautiful green marble that's unique to Iona, although they're still hidden by the hills. But then you come around and you look to the southeast, and the Isle of Arran is visible, and then you can see the sound of Iona, and then you keep turning and you begin to see Mull, and it fills your field of view until it disappears into the distance in the northwest. You can see the little town of Finneford at the tip of Mull, where you board the ferry for the 10-minute trip over to Iona. And then as your eyes adjust, you can begin to see even greater distances. The caps of Jura come into view, as well as Ben More, the highest mountain on Mull. You can even begin to see the outline of the little town of Vanessen. If you look at the first hymn, you'll see that it's called Vanessen. It's a tune that grew up right there in that little town where my friend Jan lives. And then you can see Tyree and Ely. It's beautifully breathtaking. And as my climbing companions and I looked around, I took a few moments to catch my breath. They didn't seem to need that. We looked down toward the Abbey, and that's when we saw it. It was indistinguishable when we were on the ground. But from the heights of Dunny, it was clearly visible. There, surrounding the Abbey and its outbuildings, was the clearly seen walls of Columba's ancient monastery. None of us could believe it, but there it was. Forming three sides with the bay as the fourth, there were the ancient defenses constructed over 15 centuries before we arrived. It quieted us as we stood on this ancient hill fort 300 yards above the island below us, on ground that had first seen human footprints in the Iron Age. It was as though we could see more that was visible.